Did you know that the coldest body temperature a person survived was 56 degrees Fahrenheit or 13.7 degrees Celsius? Good thing that's an arbitrary piece of information that won't be relevant whatsoever. Have you ever wondered if you would survive your favorite indie horror franchises and how you'd probably die a brutal and slow death in them because you have the survival instincts of 3 frogs trying to eat the same bug at the same time?
I crave sustenance, father.
So let's do a tier list of indie horror games, but ranked by whether you and moi would survive them. A is for won't die even if I was a fetus. F is for will die if I even breathe wrong. I'm okay. For each game ranking, we'll be taking into account what it's like being the protagonist of the universe, but also what it's like being the average human being in the universe. But before we start, first of all, we will inevitably have spoilers for these games, so take this as your warning for that. And also, I am not a lore expert on these franchises, and thus will probably miss some stuff. So if any of these games were or are one of your hyperfixations, and you know an unhealthy amount of information about them, this is your sign to drop your best actually moment in the comment section. And if you do, you get a participatory frog. FNAF! The scary pizzeria franchise that probably has committed all possible OSHA violations. There may be some war crimes, the haunting animatronics that are possessed by spirits of dead children who were murdered by the co-founder of the franchise, who also became a haunting animatronic himself after dying in a spin lawsuit, and keeps opening new locations somehow even though they already have more losses than you could possibly imagine. Is already not that great in terms of how safe it would be to be in the general area of said locations. But have no fears, Spake's training arc is here. All that time vicariously watching other YouTubers play FNAF has prepared me for this moment such that I can confidently say,
this I'm out.
But it's okay, right? Like, at least most of these threats are contained within the locations themselves, right? It's not like whatever is powering these threats transcends the borders of the pizzeria and how you can't run or hide from it because it's a universal constant within this world. Introducing Remnant and Agony! As explained by the books and alluded to in the games, these are what turn your animatronics into animatronics that get quirky at night. Remnant is when you take the soul juice of people and fuse them into medium of your choosing, mostly metal in FNAF's case, which causes possession to occur. But agony, on the other hand, happens when intense negative emotions are infused into a place or thing and begin to manifest in whatever way the universe deems fit. So, what does this mean for how survivable FNAF is? Well, even if you were a light year away from the nearest Five Nights at Freddy's location, if, say, you had a particularly bad gaming session and decided to throw your controller into your wall, the controller may come to life and decide to throw you into your wall instead. And this is not to mention all the other fun contraptions, like digital viruses that can take over people, discs that cause illusions, gas that causes never-ending nightmares for decades, and so much more, that make any kind of visit to a Fazbear location a once-in-a-lifetime, and not in the good way, and much less so as the night guard that we play as in the games, especially since the canon endings in several of these games result in some not-so-alive situations, such as being scooped into a skin suit in FNAF's sister location, or being burnt alive at the end of Five Nights at Freddy's Pizza Sim. Although if you're a walking corpse like the one that Michael Afton ends up becoming, are you really considered dead? With that said, given that Five Nights at Freddy's is deadly for anyone and everyone who has anger issues or has the pleasure of knowing somebody else who has anger issues, in F tier you go for FNAF. Bendy and the Ink Machine. Like the franchises we've mentioned already, Joey Drew Studios was probably not that... Oh my god! Help! Somebody! Help! Help! Oh wait, it's actually quite comfy. So the deadly ink that hides monsters that want to abduct you into their inky hive mind makes Joey Drew Studios not the most ideal vacation day, but that's okay, because if I was in this universe, I would have all the honor and prestige that comes with being an animator at Joey Drew Studios, which means I would probably never be able to see light or touch grass again after signing that contract. But at least that means I would get free tickets to the Bendyland amusement park by being forced into the ink machine and becoming an angry ink. And even as an inky doomed creature, life isn't all rainbows and sunshine, as between the ink demon himself, Alice Angel trying to perfect herself via organ harvesting, life is still perilous for us inky folks. But as the protagonist, your chances are a bit better. Luckily, Henry himself has some allies like Allison, Tom Boris, and Boris who have saved him in some otherwise not very savable situations. And as Audrey, you not only have these allies, but you also have some fancy ink powers that help nullify any ink enemies if you manage to do a sneaky up to them. Of course, this doesn't spare them from the wrath of any of the previously mentioned enemies, but it does give them an upper hand. Quick, what's that over there? Speaking of Audrey, if you were lucky enough, or unlucky enough depending on your perspective, to be in the cycle where Wilson froze everything so he could eventually create his own OC for funsies, it gets even more complicated. Because Bendy never saw the end, things managed to have developed a bit more, for better and for worse. There's an argument to be made that the Lost Ones are a bit more safe in this cycle, as we see some more expressive individuals as well as groups and mini societies form. But alternatively, the whole entire scenery is becoming more and more disheveled, and the Ink Demon himself was also able to develop more into a cutie patootie who's a good little.
The woman was too stunned to speak.
Now, through the ink, he can lure people via voices in your head, and even if you don't eventually get consumed by him, the believers of the Ink Demon are not treated nicely by the rest of the Lost Ones, to say the least, which doesn't bode well for surviving as a Lost One in this universe. Outside of the studio, it seems like the Disney-esque alternative universe is kept under wraps, which, as they say, ignorance is bliss. Although, after the fall of Joey's studio, giant corporations seem to be hiring desperate people to become experiments for the ink machine, which presumably causes them to turn into either the characters or lost souls in the inky universe. But as long as you manage to avoid them, you are a-okay, and it's implied that some of the smarter background characters left before everything went down and were able to live out their lives. So if I were to rate the Wilson cycle in terms of surviving, I would give it a C, while the normal cycles I would give a D. However, given the ending where Audrey gains the power to control the inky universe, then survival ends up looking a lot better, up to maybe even a B or an A. So to average it all out, that puts our devilish little friend around C tier, which, when you think about it, looks like a sideways Bendy. Coincidence? I think not. Next up is Poppy Playtime, where the only game you should be playing is bolting out of there as soon as possible unless you have a death wish. Also known as, if I had a nickel for every time an indie horror franchise protagonist was convinced to return to the deepest, darkest pit of doom by a very not suspicious letter, I would have 2, which isn't a lot. But it's weird that it's already happened twice. But what if you weren't the protagonist and were at the good old Poppy Playtime factory as a simple background character, as a worker at the Playtime Co., as a child at the Playtime Co.? Children were literally used for experiments, and during the hour of joy, the toys decided to activate their trap card and channel their inner whimsy by murdering everyone. And anyone who somehow survived that initial massacre would just be hunted down later by the remaining toys, like it's a cleanup phase in the Battle Royale game. And even if you were a good toy trying to lay low, congrats! Your goodness was rewarded by dying in an exploding generator instead of dying brutally some other way. What a feel-good moment indeed that surely won't cause any crash outs. That's rough, buddy. And I'm sure all these years these toys have been left all to their own devices has caused them all to mellow out, right? What do you mean putting these murderous creatures in a survival of the fittest situation will cause only the strongest, deadliest, and most desperate to survive? That is so silly, you jokester, you prankster. Between Huggy Wuggy giving you the final hug of your life, Mommy Longlegs putting you into rigged death games, Catnap who will kill you if you don't worship the prototype, and the prototype who will kill you even if you worship him, surviving seems bleak. At the very least, our protagonists have these fancy grab pack hands, which are surprisingly versatile at keeping you safe, as long as you ignore all the warnings in the training tapes. And they have allies like Poppy, Kissy Missy, and Doey, although that last one ended in, not great terms, to say the least. Outside of the factory, things look brighter, literally and figuratively. Aside from some malfunctioning toys that probably caused some traumatic memories, most people seem to be safe from immediate danger. Huggy Wuggy did manage to escape for a teensy tiny bit, but there were no civilian casualties from his little walk in the forest, so nothing to worry about, right? As long as you stayed away, you were fine. But inside, whether a worker, civilian, kid, or the protagonist, almost everybody dies tragically. So in D tier you go, puppy playtime. 0 stars, would not recommend, get your toy refunded, kid. Funnily enough, what makes Doki Doki Literature Club so spooky is also what makes it so safe. By breaking down the fourth wall like you haven't paid rent, the true protagonist of the game becomes you yourself, and makes the only potential danger in this game the emotional damage you get from seeing the words "I gently opened the door." In fact, Doki Doki Literature Club might be one of the few horror games out there where people want to be in the universe itself. And so given all that, I think it's fair to say that Doki Doki Literature Club gets itself an A. Amanda the Adventurer. Experiments equals bad. You see what I did there? Oh, wait, let me just... In other words, as long as you don't touch the tapes at all, or try to be a vigilante and investigate into whatever suspicious things Hamlin is up to, you will probably be fine. Unfortunately for protagonist Riley, she doesn't really get this option, as her lovely Aunt Kate basically sent her death in a letter, and she gets to witness firsthand the monsters brutally murdering people. And once you touch those tapes, you can run, but you can't hide, as we see the Amanda anomaly pay Riley a little visit, regardless of where she goes. Oh, what's up? Please don't kill me. And of course, on top of all of this, there's a cult. Because of course there is a cult. And of course they're trying to summon demons, which imply two very big things. Number one, demons exist in this universe, as proven by the monsters. And number two, they're able to be summoned, which is not great for overall world safety. But hey, we didn't see any cases of the cult members themselves being hurt, because why would the people responsible for all this pain and suffering ever get karmic retribution? In summary, don't touch the tapes, don't touch Hamlin, you'll probably be fine, but otherwise, good luck. C tier. Hello Neighbor, our favorite box stacking simulator. Why do I keep saying stimulator? Our favorite box stacking simulator is pretty okay, because at the end of the day, the neighbor's just a silly little guy who honestly reasonably doesn't want people intruding on his property. Who cares if he's psychologically abusing his last living direct relative, who just so happens to be a close friend of one of the protagonists? Okay, maybe they do have a reason to intrude, but if you do decide to investigate into his funky little house, even when you get caught, it's not like he kills you, he just throws you out again. Which, given the amount of times people have been caught by him in playthroughs, really makes it seem like he has the patience of a saint. But enough with the neighbor apologist rhetoric. We are here to figure out if you can die in this universe, and it turns out, yes you can, because there's also a cult. Now luckily, this cult doesn't seem to be as bloodthirsty as the other cults we've already discussed. But let's be real here, that's a very low bar we're setting. And clearly they're not afraid to get their hands dirty if they need to. There's also this cryptid called the Guest, who likes kidnapping people. And also probably murdering them. So between the Guest and the cult, there is some level of threat. But in general, mind your own business and you'll be fine. So in B tier, Hello Neighbor goes. Baldi's Basics. So to be completely transparent, this one is the one that I'm probably the least sure about, because unlike many of the other indie horror games that we've already talked about, it's a bit ambiguous what happens when you get a game over. Did you die? Did you get expelled? Are you forever stuck in detention? We may never know, but this ambiguousness actually works to its favor, because first of all, the only actual threat is Baldi himself. Everybody else, inconvenient, annoying, mildly hostile at best. But there is some level of danger here. Like Doki Doki Literature Club, Baldi basically acknowledges the fourth wall, which, once again, makes it a bit safer. However, there is one key difference. People can get trapped in the game. Or at least it's implied that can happen, although it's not exactly clear how exactly this happens. And it seems like the player themselves never actually get trapped in the game. So really, the only threat in this universe is how good you are at math. And thus, we put Baldi Basics in B tier. With that said, tier list is done! Let's go! Originally I was gonna do a few more games, but this ended up being a lot longer than I anticipated, so if you guys want to see that, let me know. Speaking of games, if you want to see a game that I ended up making myself based on FNAF, if they could mimic your voice, check out this video that should be on the screen if I figure out how to make it work. With that being said, have a good rest of your